I don't understand what AMD is doing at CES, because it seems like on the show floor, there's some indications that they might have some really exciting stuff happening, and yet they're not seeming to want to talk about it. It's so bizarre. On the show floor, there's an AMD graphics research AI based upscaling, which they're not calling FSR4, but seems to be FSR4. That looks amazing. Hardware Unboxed just put out a video this morning, and then a little bit later in the day, we got a video from Digital Foundry, and it looks massively better than FSR 3.1. But again, this is an AMD research project. They are not calling this FSR 4, except that they did officially announce FSR 4, at least sort of. They gave this to media in their pre-briefing, including me, and then didn't do it in their big keynote announcement. They didn't even talk about it. They didn't even mention RDNA 4 in their big keynote announcement. And but these slides are officially available, and media like myself was able to present the information. So again, it seems strange, because FSR 4 looks great if it looks anything like this, but they've literally got this, apparently, when you listen, it's really interesting when you listen to the Digital Foundry video on this. By the way, all my sources will be in the video description. This is just like two PCs just sitting there in the middle of a much larger AMD presentation that you just wander up to, and maybe somebody's there to tell you about it, maybe not, and it's not called FSR 4, but you can literally play these side by side, and it seems to be FSR 3.1 versus FSR 4, and you can film the screen and all that and get a lot of information about it. And it looks awesome in both the Hardware Unboxed and the Digital Foundry video. Really, watch them in the video description. There's a bunch of side-by-sides like this that seem to indicate that all of the major issues with FSR 3.1 are solved, if this research project is FSR 4. Of course, why wouldn't it be? But they're not calling it that. What the heck, AMD? It's so strange. You can see in this shot that the moire patterns are solved. I'm not going to go ahead and steal all their content here, but go through all the side-by-sides seem to show that the fizzling in motion seems to be solved. A lot of the lack of temporal stability seems to be solved. Particle effects and transparencies looking all fuzzed and blurred, not well upscaled, seems to be solved. So this looks amazing. If this is FSR 4, FSR 4 looks great, but for some reason they cut it out of their keynote presentation. I don't understand. But maybe that isn't FSR 4. But what would it be if it isn't? Maybe there's just still too much in development on FSR 4, so this is too unfinalized for them to want to call it that. I was trying to rack my brain for why would this maybe not be ready to show and call FSR 4 yet. One thing I'm thinking of is there are no frame rate counters running here. So I am curious whether, upscalers, one thing a lot of people don't really think about is the fact that upscalers have a performance cost. You're essentially, these are at 4K output resolution, but rendering in performance mode, which is 1080p internal rendering resolution. But the upscale to go from that 1080p to that 4K output takes performance, it takes calculations. It has a certain number of milliseconds of performance cost, and the longer it takes to do that calculation, the lower your performance benefit. And so I'm wondering if maybe this image quality is looking great, but maybe the performance isn't where they want it to be yet. So maybe the old FSR gave you a larger performance boost and this doesn't. I'm totally speculating. I'm just wondering, why would they not want to call it done yet or something like that? But the image quality certainly seems to be there. So if this is performant, that looks awesome. Another thing that AMD seemed to be kind of cagey about is, will FSR 4 run on older graphics cards? There's a footnote in this slide that makes it sound like it won't. First of all, it says developed for RDNA 4. And then there's this footnote, but this footnote is worded very strange. And this might also explain another thing that this actually could be, if it's not straight up FSR 4. So let's read this footnote again. It says, AMD FSR 4 upgrade feature only available on AMD Radeon RX 9070 series graphics cards, graphics for supported games with AMD FSR 3.1 already integrated. Now, that says upgrade feature. So when I first saw this, I just assumed they were saying the upgrade to FSR 4 is only supported on the 9070 series. And it seemed to just be this is only supported on the 9070 series. However, it says upgrade feature. And then it talks about in FSR 3.1 games. So it's possible that what that actually means is you take a game running FSR 3.1, like this one, Well, that's feeding certain inputs into the FSR algorithm. Is it possible that in the 9070 series, it maybe as a driver toggle, like AMD has a bunch of driver features like AFMF and Radeon Boost, all of those things, could there be a driver toggle where it basically intercepts the FSR inputs and feeds it through the FSR4 model to give you a better upscaling? And maybe that's what we're seeing here. FSR4 running through, right? I don't know. But that's interesting because that also sounds like something that NVIDIA is doing in their presentation, where they talked about the new DLSS 4. There's the multi-frame generation, but they're also upgrading the DLSS base upscaling model from their old CNN version to a transformer model. And they've showed off a lot of image quality improvements. And Digital Foundry also got their hands on that and did confirm that there does seem to be a lot of image quality improvements to the older model of DLSS. But NVIDIA talked about the fact that within their NVIDIA app, you could manually override the older DLSS version to the newer DLSS transformer model to get those improvements. And you could upgrade that through the driver even if the game itself hasn't fully done that update. And the FSR 3.1 update, I think, did move AMD's FSR implementation to more of that kind of, you could just swap out the DLL style to get newer updates in, whereas the older versions pre-FSR 3.1 didn't. So that's where I'm starting to interpret this footnote as probably meaning that AMD will have a similar driver feature like that, where games with FSR 3.1 that haven't been updated by the game developers to FSR 4 might have a toggle where you could feed those inputs into the new FSR 4 algorithm for improved image quality. That would certainly be interesting, and that's now kind of what I think this might be talking about. Which then doesn't mean it's necessarily exclusive for RDNA 4. Also, some people at CES have found AMD representatives, had interviews, and directly asked them, is this exclusive for RDNA 4? And the answer was, they're developing it for RDNA 4. But they are open to the possibility of it going to older architectures. So I would take that as, this is probably going to launch as an RDNA 4 exclusive. Because remember how I said upscaling algorithms have a performance cost. For an AI-based algorithm, that's based on how well you can do the AI inferencing, how fast you can run that CNN model. And one of the big things they did announce for RDNA 4 architecture is supercharged AI compute, although we don't get a lot of specifics on that. So it's possible that the older cards would run the algorithm too slowly to get much of a performance boost. So I'm curious if that's what's going on there. So maybe they're designing this around the amount of machine learning acceleration available in RDNA 4. And then they'll go back and see what happens with the older ones, but that's not really their target. Because I think they really need the image quality to work, and if they need a certain level of machine learning performance to make that happen, the older cards might just not have it. So now, could they run a lightweight model or something like that? Maybe. Or maybe they'll just say the older versions of FSR are for the older generations, the newer ones, you get RDNA 4 on the new ones. Anyway, but this looks great, so why isn't AMD talking about it? It's just strange. The other thing that's strange is, again, that they are really just silent about RDNA 4 at all, other than this press deck we got. We get a vague release date of Q1 2025. So are we getting any additional information about the release date of RDNA 4 now that a little more time has passed here? Well, yes, there's two main leaks on this that do seem to corroborate each other, but that still doesn't mean they're correct. There's a bit of a light colored background on this one, so heads up on that. This is a screenshot from B&H Photo. B&H Photo sells graphics cards. They've listed the 9070 and the 9070 XT. There's no pricing or anything like that. But it does say pre-orders start on January 23rd for both models. Now, that could absolutely just be a placeholder, so by itself, I wouldn't read into that at all. However, I found at videocards.com, and by the way, again, all my sources will be linked in the video description if you want to take a closer look, a headline that says, Radeon RX 9700 XT announcement expected on January 22nd, review samples shipping already. I can tell you right now, nobody's shipped me a review sample. I'm not under any NDA yet. I don't actually already know this stuff, and I'm just pretending I don't. Like, I don't have one. Nobody's shipped me one yet. So, but honestly, AMD's been late getting me review samples before, so maybe other reviewers are getting them. One day I think I got my 7600 the day the reviews were supposed to go live, and that's when I got my review sample. I'm like, okay. So anyway, that's how it is sometimes. So anyway, I don't actually know, but this headline is saying this, but where are they getting this from? This seems to be a post on ChipHell, which when translated says the 9070 has arrived, NDA ends on the 22nd. How can we evaluate this? Not bringing the 5080 question mark? Interesting. Now anyway, NDA ends on the 22nd. Well, usually that means that's when the review embargo lifts. The review embargo usually lifts the day before you can buy them. And then we have, like I said, that B&H photo post where it says pre-orders start on January 23rd. The day after, this leak is saying the review embargo lifts. So that certainly sounds like they corroborate each other, but that's not the same thing as saying these are true, okay? So keep that in mind. Again, all we have official is Q1 2025, which it seems odd that if they would really be coming out as soon as the 23rd, that we would be this vague at this point in time when you have your big CES keynote. Where again, this just seems weird from AMD. Again, they also didn't really give any specs, but it does seem to be the case that they are both 16 gigabyte VRAM cards. That seems to have been floating around the CES floor show from AIB partners and things like that. Also, when I talked about this performance leak, where there was a RDNA 4 card running on a PC at CES, and they were able to run the Black Ops 6 benchmark, the Black Ops 6 benchmark reports things like VRAM. So that does confirm 16 gigabytes of VRAM for whichever card this was. The other rumors at CES and what seems to be going around the show floor is that both the 9070 and the XT version are both 16 gigabyte cards. That seems to be the case. So at least we have that. But what about any other sort of performance or specs? Again, AMD did not give us a lot of information here. There's this branding slide, which shows that the branding for the 9070 series lines up to the branding of the 7900 XT and 7900 GRE and 7800 XT. But saying the branding lines up isn't the same thing as saying the performance lines up. It might just mean that what they used to call the 900 and 800 XT series, like that part of the range, so like high end but not the absolute extreme tier, is what they're now branding as 9070 series. So again, this doesn't necessarily indicate performance. In the leak like this, performance seemed great. It was running up there faster than my 7900 XTX. When I tried to do side-by-sides on that, which made me think that that doesn't seem quite right, but maybe it is. Maybe it's amazing. Who knows, right? So there's that. Are there any other performance leaks? By the way, in this video, I had said that I had a theory that maybe the graphic settings weren't what the person thought when they ran this. I should give a little more detail on why I think that. It wasn't just the performance numbers. I saw some people in the comment section saying that, oh, a person from IGN who did this must just be incompetent. So here's what I think is going on. So notice that while there are PCs on the show floor running RDNA 4 graphics, like that's happening right here, and people are free to use them, there's not any frame rate counters running, and that's really important. None of the games being showed off on RDNA 4 are allowed to have frame rate counters running. But Black Ops 6 was running on this PC, and Black Ops 6 has a built-in benchmark tool which has a frame rate counter on it, which means that the reviewer is probably not supposed to close out of the game that's running and probably wasn't supposed to go to the benchmark tool. These PCs are sometimes left unattended, but sometimes there's kind of like guards, like attendants there. So it might have been that the attendant was kind of looking the other way, was busy, wasn't there for some reason. And so this person was able to get over to the benchmark tool, but maybe wasn't really supposed to. And these PCs might not be supposed to close out of whatever software they're running, which means you wouldn't be able to restart the game without drawing massive attention to yourself if you aren't supposed to close out of the software. Does that make sense? So it's well known that Black Ops 6 doesn't fully update graphics settings until the game is restarted. And even if this reviewer didn't change any graphics settings, that doesn't mean that somebody else at this booth didn't change them before the person got there. Does that make sense? So in other words, we can't be sure they really knew what this was. Now, maybe I'm wrong about all of that, but that's another reason why I wouldn't be confident that the settings were what they thought they were. Anyway, this is the main leak from the CES floor on performance, but there is another big rumor circulating right here. Now, I don't know what to make of this one. I'm gonna put this on your grains of salt scale. I would say like you're taking like a big doses of salt, like you're just shaking the whole thing here, because this just seems, there's a few things about this that seem a bit weird. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about it, because this would be another indication that maybe AMD has some monster performance on their hands. Which, if that's true, why aren't you talking about it? Okay, I do have some thoughts on why they may not be talking about it, but more on that in a minute. So anyway, what is this performance leak? So we've got the 9070 XT 3D Mark scores leak out. These might be total BS, but if they're true, we're seeing it clocking over 3 gigahertz, drawing over 330 watts TBP, which seems high, higher than we might expect for a 70 class card. But then this could be an AIB model, and oftentimes they push those a lot harder. But the time spy result is faster than a 4080 Super and just a little bit below a 7900 XTX. So this would put that up in last gen like 4080 Super 7900 XTX territory in time spy specifically. These are not gaming performance, this is synthetic benchmarks, which doesn't always line up with reality and gaming performance. But a big one is also the 4070 Ti in Speedway. Speedway is a ray tracing benchmark. Now, it's not crazy like path tracing levels of ray tracing, so it doesn't destroy AMD cards the same way that, Alan Wake 2 full RT, or Indiana Jones and the Great Circle full RT, or a Cyberpunk RT Overdrive. It's not quite that. But scoring as high as a 4070 Ti in this, it certainly indicates pretty good ray tracing performance, and it would put it somewhat in line with the 7900 XTX. If you buy these, videocards.com has stacked them up so you can get some kind of comparison points here, where the 9070 XT is showing even performance in Speedway, that's the ray tracing text with the 7900 XTX, and actually beating the 4070 Ti, actually fairly handily. And then the Time Spy Extreme, which is the non-RT test, we can see that here. And in this one, it again, between the 4080 Super and the 7900 XTX in that result. So that's certainly interesting if these ended up being true. But if you look at this, it's coming from the Chip Hell Forum post. Chip Hell Forum, sometimes they do have legitimate leaks ahead of time. One thing that's weird about this, though, is AMD, again, in the interviews that people are getting with AMD representatives, is specifically saying that AIB partners do not have review drivers for this, which means you couldn't get the actual gaming performance. So that's what's weird about this, is based on what AMD has said, the drivers shouldn't be out to be able to get these results. And Chip Hell Forums, when they do get accurate leaks ahead of time, are usually coming from sources from AIB partners, that kind of thing. So that's where this seems strange. Also, this says RX 7800 XT, although the specs aren't right for a 7800 XT. So is that just that the GPU-Z isn't reading it correctly, or are they somehow using a driver for a different card and getting it to work? Like, again, it seems strange. But if you do buy this, that's where you see the boost clocks over 3 gigahertz and the base clocks at about 2500. That's interesting. Again, you also get the, where is it? That's not it. We get this, where we're seeing the power, board power going at 329 watts. And then we get the Time Spy, this one's the Time Spy, and this one is the Speedway results on those. And again, they're blurring out the card that it's saying here. So I don't know, guys. This kind of stuff could easily be made up. But if those results are true, this card could be really exciting. Imagine you get a card that's like 7900 XTX 4080 tier with a good upscaler and decent ray tracing. That sounds really exciting if the price is right. So that's the other thing, is what is the price? And why wouldn't AMD tell us anything about this? I mean, my last thoughts on why is AMD suddenly so hush-hush and decided not to mention this in their keynote? AMD's keynote was before NVIDIA's keynote, and it was very well known that NVIDIA would be talking about their new graphics cards, including pricing. So AMD might have just been like, okay, we need to make sure we're priced competitively, So let's actually just shut up about this and see what NVIDIA is doing and then decide what to do. And so they're probably gonna have all, that's probably what they did. So now they've seen what NVIDIA is going on. They're gathering all the information they can and then getting the kind of general buzz and feedback about all of that. And then have a meeting. Okay, how do we need to price these things for this to make sense? That's what I'm guessing is going on with AMD in the Radeon division, and why they ended up deciding to be hush-hush on this. Because if they ended up announcing, pricing and everything, and then NVIDIA just decides to undercut them massively, this gives AMD the chance to undercut them massively. Now, will they do it? AMD has a long track record of pricing too high relative to NVIDIA. People go to NVIDIA anyway because they're the name brand, they have the mind share, they have the feature set. And then AMD ends up cutting their prices to be really competitive and actually offer a really good deal. But the initial reviews are bad because they're based on the original MSRP. If AMD actually has an upscaler that dramatically improves FSR 3.1 and is at least as good as the current version of DLSS. Maybe it doesn't match the transformer model that we're seeing announced now, but if it's at least as good as the initial version of DLSS, and then if they actually have performance numbers anything like this, if it seems to have 16 gigabytes of VRAM, so if they're pricing this aggressively against the 5070. But if they end up beating it in performance, having a massively upgraded upscaler, and having 16 gigabytes of VRAM versus 12, if they can get aggressive pricing against it as well, that could be something really exciting. So I am cautiously optimistic about what's coming with RDNA 4, given all of this, and especially if this ends up being what FSR 4 looks like in every game, and it's that much better. That would be amazing. So I'm cautiously optimistic here, but the silence is weird from AMD. Like I said, though, it's probably just because they really want to do this right. And so they really wanted to figure out what exactly is going on with NVIDIA first. That's my best guess. Still feels weird that they're not calling this FSR 4 when it really seems to be. Anyway, that's what I've got for you guys today. Hope you found this useful and or interesting. What are your thoughts on what's going on with AMD Radeon GPUs and CES? What are your expectations? What would the price and performance have to look like for you to want to buy it, especially if FSR 4 really delivers like it does here? And I highly encourage you to watch this Hardware Unboxed and Digital Foundry videos looking at this. It's kind of limited by them having to film the screen, but even just filming the screen, it looks massively better. And I think that's a really good sign, because if even with the filming screen artifacts and quality issues, you can see the massive improvements, that's huge. Hope all of you have an excellent day.